Have you ever sat alone in the quiet space of your home as the late afternoon sunlight pours through the window and the clock ticks steadily in the corner? In those moments, there is an invisible weight pressing down from within that is not caused by age or the frailty of the body. It is not a typical physical ache, but a silent weariness, an empty stillness that makes your heart feel heavy. We often complain about aching joints, fading memory, or tired feet, but perhaps the heaviest part of growing older does not lie in the back or the knees, but right in the chest. It is the lingering regrets, the oversized expectations, the old wounds, or the habits that are no longer suitable. These very burdens are what block the radiant joy within your soul. This is not a flashy speech or an attempt to urge you to strive harder. You do not need any more pressure. This is simply a gentle and slow reminder for you to realize that the next chapter of life is not about accumulating, struggling, or fixing, but about letting go. Letting go to set yourself free, to rediscover the lightness and peace that have always belonged to you. The Buddha once taught that to let go is to be free. Right now, let us walk together through 8 things that you probably no longer need to carry. In the minutes ahead, do not ask yourself what you want to keep, but ask your heart what you are ready to put down so that your soul can become spacious once again. Truths. 1. Letting go of the belief that there is nothing left to learn. Have you ever felt quietly and almost imperceptibly that the world no longer seems to expect you to grow any further? There is a deeply toxic, implicit belief that often clings to us after a certain age, the thought that we already know everything we need to know. After many years of striving, it seems society assumes you should just sit back with what you have instead of continuing to reach for new horizons. This is a dangerous stillness. The belief that learning is only for the young and that the wisdom of the elderly must stand still like a stone statue is a silent thief stealing your joy of living. The truth is, the door to peace in your later years is not built by holding on to old knowledge, but by always keeping your mind open to the unknown. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a beautiful story about a senior monk named Ananda. Even though he had turned 80, every morning he began by bowing before the altar of the Blessed One and reciting the verses as if it were the first time he had ever heard them. A young novice, out of curiosity, asked, "Teacher, why does a great master like you still practice like a beginner?" The elder monk smiled gently and replied, "Because a beginner looks at the world with wonder, while a true teacher is one who understands that they actually know very little." It is easy for us to think that because we have lived through many decades, experienced all the ups and downs from wars, marriages, and losses to the great turning points of the era, we have officially graduated from the lessons of life. But the Buddha taught something entirely different. He said that just as a candle cannot burn without fire, humans cannot truly live without a spiritual life. This life does not end at any age milestone. In fact, it only truly begins when the noise of ambition fades, when the heart settles, and the soul begins to whisper questions that your younger self never had enough time to bother seeking answers for. I once met a woman named Eleanor at a retreat in Oregon. She was 76 years old, a widow with a very gentle voice but eyes that always sparkled with intelligence. She shared that she had just started learning Mandarin. She was not learning it to travel or to impress anyone, but simply because she felt curious. She told me with a radiant smile that she wanted to see how much further her brain could still stretch, and it turned out it was still constantly reaching. That statement truly touched my soul. It made me reflect. When was the last time you let your mind stretch, not reaching for practical things or money, but simply reaching for something that stirs your soul? It could be a foreign language, a poem, or a profound spiritual truth. You see, our hearts become heavy, not because of age, but because we have stopped letting the light of discovery in. A closed mind is the beginning of stagnation, but a curious mind is the fountain of youth that no cosmetic can replace. Look at the lotus flower, the most sacred symbol of Buddhism. It does not grow in pure water, but sprouts from the mud, yet it still persistently rises and blooms petal by petal toward the sun. Similarly, no matter how old you are, your mind can still bloom, not despite the mud of life, but precisely because of it. So, I want to ask you, my precious friends, what new question can you contemplate today? What truth have you been silently avoiding just because you think you are too old to change your perspective? What would happen if you approached this chapter of life not as the end of learning, but as its most sacred beginning? Once you open that door again, as gently as meeting an old friend, you will see wonders waiting. And from here, we will move toward another door, one much harder to open, which leads not to dry knowledge, but straight into the deepest realm of the heart. That is the task of learning how to let go of toxic relationships that are silently draining your energy without having to carry any burden of guilt. Truths 2. Letting go of toxic relationships without feeling guilty. As we begin to enter the kingdom of the heart, there is a truth that many of us still carry like a painful secret. It is that the older we get, the more intensely we crave peace. This is not the kind of peace that comes from the silence of a room or the solitude of a house, but a gentle, settling peace right inside the chest. It is that comfortable feeling when you no longer have to brace yourself mentally before every phone call, every visit, or every interaction with someone. Yet look back and see how many of us are still trying to hold on to people in our lives who do nothing but stir up instability and exhaustion. The hardest part is that sometimes those people are our own flesh and blood. There is a silent ache when we realize that the blood tie we have always cherished is becoming a shackle tightening around our soul's serenity. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a story about a monk named Tissa. He was known in the monastery as a very dedicated person, but he always kept a somber and distant face. One evening, his teacher noticed the hidden sadness in his student's eyes and asked Tissa to share honestly. With great shame, Tissa confessed that he still persistently wrote letters to his older brother, even though the brother only ever replied with angry and cruel words. Tissa said that because they were blood relatives, he felt it was his duty to endure everything. The teacher silently looked out at the garden where a dry bamboo branch had just fallen onto the path and asked Tissa if he saw that branch. It was once part of the bamboo tree, once grew there together, but now it no longer served the growth of the tree. Would the bamboo tree weep or wither because of the absence of that dead branch? Or would it simply continue to reach high toward the light? Tissa sat in silence and felt something inside him loosen, not in rebellion or resentment, but in a quiet relief from realizing he had the right to keep living. We are often trapped in old dogmas that loyalty means enduring harm, that love is synonymous with accepting infinite pain, and that old age means choosing the path of patient endurance, regardless of how great the cost to our soul. But Buddhist wisdom offers a much kinder and more discerning path. The Buddha taught that if you hold on to anger or pain from others, it is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. But in reality, your own palm is the first to be burned. Criticism, manipulation, or even just chronic negativity from those around you are not burdens you are obligated to carry, especially at this stage, when your soul has already weathered too many storms to achieve the stillness it has now. I once sat next to a woman named Clara at a tea meditation. She was 82 years old, incredibly polite and warm, but in her voice hid a heartbreaking weariness. She told me that for many years she had regularly attended Sunday dinners with her eldest son, even though every week the meeting ended in tears. He criticized all her choices, mocked her spiritual beliefs, and cruelly dismissed all his mother's emotions. She whispered to me through sobs, asking what kind of person a mother would be if she turned her back on her own child. I chose silence because, in truth, Clara already had the answer in her heart. The following week, she did not go to dinner. Instead, she sat alone on her porch with a cup of jasmine tea and let the evening breeze comfort her. She told me later that for the first time in decades, she felt her chest could truly breathe in the open air completely. This is absolutely not a call for you to hurriedly cut ties or hate anyone. It is an invitation for you to look back and see for yourself whether a relationship is nourishing peace or silently eroding you like a swift current over a stone. You have every right to choose who can enter the sacred space of your heart in this chapter of life. Setting boundaries to protect yourself does not make you a cold or selfish person, but it proves you are wise enough to understand the value of self-reliance. Because there is a type of the most authentic love that begins by protecting your own light. When you let go of toxic connections, you are creating space for truly meaningful and better connections. And when you create that space, another truth will appear clearer than ever. Clutter does not only live in relationships, it also dwells right inside the home, in old mementos, and in the drawers of memory that we still stubbornly keep even though they no longer bring warmth. Therefore, we will move together to an equally important journey of clearing, which is liberating yourself from the material things and memories that are weighing down your living space. Truths. 3. Letting go of clutter in material, emotion, and mind. After we have cleared the barriers in our relationships, another truth gradually emerges more clearly. That is, that clutter does not only reside in the people around us, but also hides right within our living spaces and the deep drawers of our minds. Have you ever stood before an old cabinet that you haven't opened in years, only to feel a sharp ache that you cannot clearly explain? It is strange how inanimate things like an outdated outfit or a shelf covered in dust can stir something so deep inside us. That is where a silent weight begins to accumulate. It does not always come from a grand tragedy, but often from the quiet piling up of things we never intended to carry throughout our lives. We often mistake clutter for just a pile of extra belongings, old bills, faded souvenirs, or expired medicine bottles. But the truth is, clutter is memory. It is pain. It is attachment. And sometimes it is avoidance disguised under cardboard boxes and tangled strings. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha once taught to let go of the past, let go of the future, and let go of the present to cross to the other shore of existence with a completely liberated mind. Of course, this teaching does not mean you must throw away every rice bowl or cherished family photo album. What he wanted to point out is the deeper clutter within, which are the attachments binding us to old identities. These are the stories of the person we used to be, repeating like radio static in the mind. There is a Buddhist story about a woman named Sama who came to the monastery every week with baskets of fresh fruit and bright incense. Her offerings were very generous, but her face always showed clear signs of anxiety, and her eyes were full of distraction. One day, an old monk asked her why she never stayed to practice meditation. She burst into tears and confessed that her house was too full, with too many rooms and too many mementos left by her late husband from 10 years ago. She said that if she threw away his shoes, she would feel as if she were losing him all over again. The monk quietly took an apple she had just brought, held it out in front of her, and asked, "Can you hold on to this apple while still receiving another one?" Shama shook her head. The monk gently said, "Then how can you receive the peace you seek if your hands and your heart are already full?" That story always leaves me with deep reflections because I see the shadow of Sama in many elderly people I have talked to. Rooms filled with souvenirs now bring a sense of heaviness rather than comfort. These are letters never read again, items kept not out of love, but out of the fear that if they are released, what once existed will also be erased. But the gentle truth is that letting go of an object does not mean letting go of a person. Clearing space in your home is not erasing history, but creating room for your spirit to breathe and move again. Your memories do not live in the attic or under the bed. They live in your very heart. I remember Mr. Harold, a man who decided to downsize his living space from a 5-bedroom house to a small cottage after many decades. When I asked if he missed his old things, he smiled and said not at all. Now, every morning he wakes up to see golden sunlight dancing on the floor instead of seeing layers of dust on old shelves. So, I want to ask you sincerely, what are you holding on to, not because you truly need it, but because you are afraid of what the emptiness will feel like? Can you trust that what truly belongs to your heart cannot be taken away by any act of cleaning? What would happen if by emptying the external space, you also began to liberate the internal space for new breaths, new joys, and perhaps a new story for yourself? Because once we learn to release what no longer supports us, we will begin to view the journey of aging itself with completely different eyes. That brings us to a truth everyone must face, a silent fear of the fading of time on our own bodies. Truths. 4. Letting go of the fear of aging. There will be a moment that arrives quietly and without warning when you catch a glimpse of your own reflection in the mirror, and in a single breath, you feel a bit of a stranger to the person looking back at you. The skin has become softer and thinner, the shoulders slightly slumped, and the sparkle in the eyes is still there, but has been mellowed by the passage of time. Perhaps you will ask yourself, since when did I become old? That is a question most of us will ask ourselves, not necessarily with shame, but with a kind of reverence mixed with awe. Like waking up in a house that has been your home for so long, but whose foundation has begun to shift. However, even more terrifying than the actual aging process is the fear of growing old, which silently becomes the thief of our peace. In modern society, we are subtly taught that aging is synonymous with becoming worthless, that gray hair is a sign of fading, and that slowing down is disappearing. From wrinkle-erasing creams to senior discounts whispered like an apology, the world is constantly pushing us into the belief that human value always has an expiration date. But the Buddha taught something infinitely more merciful and profound. He once said that decay is inherent in all component things, so strive for liberation with diligence. From that perspective, aging is not a glitch in the biological system. It is the system itself. It is not a betrayal of the body, but the rhythm of life breathing through your every cell. There is a Zen story about an old master once famous throughout the land for his beauty and still presence. As he grew older, his disciples noticed his hands began to tremble and his steps were no longer steady. One day, a young student asked the teacher if he was sad that his body no longer served him as before. The old master smiled, placed his hand on his chest, and said that this body is like an oil lamp. When the oil runs low, the flame may flicker. But do you see? The light is always shining there. It was the acceptance of impermanence that made him radiant, not youth. Old age is actually not just about what is fading away, but about what is being revealed. When the rush of ambition falls silent, that space is replaced by stillness. The hunger to have more gradually subsides and makes room for contentment with what is present. The need for attention from others gives way to the joy of simply observing the world. I remember a woman named Joy, a name perfectly suited to her soul. At 89, she told me she used to be terrified of growing old, but now she wears her wrinkles like prayer beads. Each fold on her skin reminds her that she has stayed here long enough to know love, to cry, to laugh, and to survive all the old versions of herself, versions that once thought they would never overcome adversity. Therefore, I want to ask you gently, what would happen if aging is not something happening to you, but something blooming from within you? What if the body with all its changes is not closing doors, but inviting you to step through entirely new thresholds? Can you imagine how gentle life would become when we stop resisting the laws of nature? And perhaps, once you embrace old age not as a threat, but as a wise teacher, you will begin to understand a most profound truth. That being older does not mean becoming less, but in many ways, it is when you become freer than ever. But this freedom does not come from others, not from children, spouses, or external praise. There is something else we must learn to release right now, and that is the expectation that someone else will bring us happiness. Truths. 5. Letting go of the expectation that others will make us happy. There is a silent pain that often visits many people in their later years. It does not always appear with tears or loud suffering. Sometimes it is just a whisper creeping through an ordinary afternoon when no one calls. When the house becomes excessively quiet as sunset falls, and you suddenly realize no one has asked how your day was. In those moments, it is easy for us to wonder why no one comes to our side, why no one fills the void we feel within. This is a very human and compassionate thought, but it also points to one of the most common misunderstandings we often carry as we age, which is the belief that someone else will eventually be responsible for our happiness. It could be a spouse, children, friends, or even a community. We tell ourselves that when they notice us, when they appreciate us, or when they finally understand the situation, only then will we feel fulfilled. However, in Buddhist philosophy, the path to peace is not through waiting but through an awakening from within. The Buddha once taught an incredibly powerful truth that no one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. This is not a cold reality, but actually a message of total liberation. Let me tell you the story of a man named Raymond. He was 78 years old when I met him at a local meditation group. He had been a devoted father, a faithful husband, and a kind neighbor, a decent man by all social standards. Yet after his wife passed away and his children moved to distant cities, he found himself surrounded by silence in his own home. He told me in a sad voice that he thought they would check on his health more often, and he thought he held a more important place in their lives. But then one day, he decided to stop waiting. Everything did not change instantly. Like a lightning bolt, it started with walking around the neighborhood, joining a watercolor painting class, and then volunteering to read books to children at the local library. He did not wait for anyone's permission to live again, but granted that power to himself. He smiled and said it turned out he was not too old to start. He was just too tired of waiting for others to bring him joy. That is the heart of the matter. So many of us have spent decades just waiting for someone to turn the key and open the door of happiness for us. But what if that key has been in your pocket all along? The elderly people I have met who always radiate self-contained joy never sit around waiting for an invitation. They create the invitation for themselves. They plant flowers, write poetry, practice Tai Chi, learn photography, or simply sit under a tree and let the sunlight warm their faces as a form of prayer. They never say they are too old, but always ask, why not right now? So I want to ask you something very softly, not to pressure you, but to wake you up. Is there anything you are waiting for others to bring to you that you could start giving to yourself today? Is it love, connection, permission, or beauty and playfulness? You are completely worthy of the right to enjoy your own company, to nurture yourself like a beautiful garden instead of seeing yourself as a burden. Because true happiness, the kind of lasting and deep happiness from the bottom of the soul, is not something delivered to your door by someone else. It is something you build through every breath, every moment, with your own hands and mind. And once you recognize this truth, something else will become clearer than ever. All the comparisons with your younger self, the days of being faster or more admired, will begin to lose their grip. That is exactly what we need to release next for the soul to be truly free, which is the liberation from the burden of comparing ourselves to the past glories that have gone. Truths 6. Letting go of comparing yourself to your younger self. This often happens in an incredibly silent way. Perhaps when you flip through old photos, happen to observe a young person jogging past your window, or hear someone's voice full of confidence and ambition. A part of you will start to whisper that I used to be like that. And if you are not alert enough, that whisper will quickly become a bleeding wound in your heart. You begin to wonder where that radiant version of yourself has gone, why you no longer feel such an abundant source of energy. Comparison, especially with your own past, is one of the most subtle and tempting forms of suffering in the later stages of life. It does not scream, but it permeates your mind, making you begin to measure your current worth with old yardsticks like appearance, speed, or attention from the crowd. You hold a ruler from the past to measure the present, and naturally, the present always seems shorter and lacking. But what would happen if I told you that the younger version with glowing skin and endless energy actually could not survive the challenges you have overcome until today? What you possess now is a calmness, a softness, and a depth of soul that youth has never attained. There is a Buddhist parable about a young disciple who always felt envious of his master's serene presence. He said he also wanted to be still and never be shaken like that. The master led him to a mountain stream and asked him to scoop a bowl of water and then throw a stone into it. The ripples immediately distorted the reflection. Afterward, the master led him to a deep ancient well and asked him to repeat the action. He was amazed to find that the well was so deep and quiet that the stone could not even make the surface waver. The master smiled and said that youth is like a stream, flowing fast, noisy, and easily agitated, while old age is a deep well, peaceful, clear, and steadfast. I once met a woman named Teresa, 84 years old, a person with sharp intellect and a generous soul. She shared that she had once stopped going to see her granddaughter's dance performances, not because she did not love the girl, but because every time she watched her granddaughter dance, she automatically compared it to her own nimble steps in her youth. She had unintentionally turned her granddaughter's joy into her own pain. It took her a long time to realize that truth in order to step back, learning to observe with pure love instead of loss. That is true wisdom, witnessing the beauty of others without using it as a yardstick for your own worth, letting youth be youth and letting yourself be yourself in the most complete way. The Buddha taught that comparing oneself with others or with the past brings no peace because comparison is always rooted in illusion. You were not born to forever be the person of the past. That chapter has been written and closed, and now you are the one holding the entire book of your life in your hands. That book contains not only the excitement of the opening chapters, but also the depth of the closing ones, not just speed, but also an invaluable stillness. So, ask yourself with tolerance, what do you gain when you keep measuring the present by a path you are no longer walking on? When you stop comparing the present with the past, something inside will begin to soften. You no longer go to war with time, but begin to reconcile with the movement of life. It is within that softness that an invitation to heal will appear. leading us to the hardest but most healing work, forgiving ourselves and letting go of the regrets still echoing in the heart. Truths 7. Letting go of regret and learning to forgive yourself. There are nights when all things have sunk into stillness, leaving only you to face yourself, and the ghosts of the past suddenly rise more powerfully than ever. These are the words you wish you hadn't spoken, the wrong decisions you wish you could go back and fix, or the missed opportunities that now leave only an unquenchable regret. We often tend to become the harshest judges of ourselves as we age. You look back at your life through a microscope, scrutinizing every crack and blaming yourself for why you were so clumsy back then. This regret does not make us better. It acts like a heavy anchor dragging your soul to the deep bottom of sadness, preventing you from enjoying the peace of the present. You keep punishing your younger version with the wisdom that you have only just acquired today. The Buddha once taught a very moving truth, that you can search the whole universe for someone more deserving of your love and tolerance than yourself, but that person will never appear. You are the one who needs forgiveness most. He emphasized that true compassion must start from within, for without self-compassion, we will never achieve true peace. In the ancient scriptures, there is a story of a man named Kamar, who lived his whole life in torment over the mistakes of his youth. When he met the Buddha, he knelt and wept because he believed he was unworthy of salvation. The Buddha gently asked him if a mother saw her child trip and fall. Would she beat him, or would she pick him up and brush the dust off his clothes? Kamar replied that the mother would surely pick the child up. The Buddha smiled and said, "Then why are you more cruel to yourself than a mother is to her child? The past has passed like a dream. What matters is that you are standing here with a heart that knows how to repent." I remember the story of Mr. Paul, a man who always lived in self-reproach because he had spent too much time on work and missed the growing up of his children. At nearly 80 years old, he still carried that pain like an open wound. One day, following the advice of a teacher, he wrote a letter to himself of 40 years ago. In that letter, he did not criticize. Instead, he tried to understand that young man, who also had to endure so much pressure and worry for family life with heavy shoulders. When he put down the pen and spoke words of forgiveness to his younger self, a weight of 1,000 pounds seemed to be lifted. He realized that his current wisdom was born precisely from the mistakes and stumbles of yesterday. Without those painful lessons, he would never have become the profound and tolerant man he was today. Forgiving yourself is not an act of denying responsibility or erasing the past. It is a redefinition of mercy. It is accepting that at that time, with that understanding in those circumstances, you did the best you could. Every mistake is actually a step leading you toward enlightenment, and if you keep standing still to stare at that step with hatred, you will never be able to move forward to the higher levels of serenity. It is time for you to retire from the role of a harsh judge. Allow yourself to rest. Let those regrets melt under the light of compassion, like snow melting when spring arrives. Therefore, I want to ask you a very profound question. If today were the last day you could see the sun, would you want to spend those precious moments blaming yourself? Or would you want to give yourself a warm embrace of reconciliation? When you truly release the shackles of the past, you will find yourself strangely light. That lightness not only beautifies your soul, but it also prepares you with the purest luggage to enter the final part of this journey. That is the ultimate letting go, a calm preparation for what lies beyond human control, so that we can face the final law of life with a peaceful smile. Truths 8. Letting go of the lie that it is too late. After passing through the deep layers of forgiveness and clearing the burdens of the soul, one final barrier often stands tall before us like an insurmountable stone wall. It is the resigned whisper of the mind saying that now, everything is too late. We tell ourselves that youth has passed, opportunities are gone, and now is the time to just sit back and wait for the conclusion of life's play. This is perhaps the greatest lie we have ever believed. It creates a kind of invisible shackle that makes us stop dreaming, stop hoping, and stop truly living, even while breath still flows steadily in our chests. Society often spreads a misconception that life is like a sprint, and if you do not reach the goal by a certain age, it means you have failed. But the sacred truth lies in the fact that each new day is an opportunity for rebirth, and the journey to enlightenment never has an age limit or an expiration date. The Buddha left a powerful teaching that each morning we are born again, and what we do today is what matters most. He never looked at the number of years a person had lived, but rather, he looked at the wakefulness in their heart at this very moment. There is a very beautiful truth in the monastic world that even a person who has lived an entire life in ignorance, if they achieve mindfulness in their final moment, that mindfulness still possesses complete saving value. In his philosophy, transformation does not happen in the past or the future. It can only happen here and now. How old you are is just a number on paper, while whether your soul is willing to bloom or not lies entirely in your decision. The aging of the body is a natural law, but the aging of the soul is a personal choice. I have witnessed stories of inspiring new beginnings that make all prejudices about age become meaningless. There is Ruth, who picked up a paintbrush for the first time at 80 and turned her home into a gallery full of vibrant colors. There is Jerome, who decided to learn to play the cello at 75 because he realized music had never left him, he had only temporarily set it aside. Or May, who began writing her memoirs at 90 with incredible sharpness and tolerance. They never asked if it was too late, they only asked, why not now? These people are like ancient mountains that always know how to let wild flowers bloom on their rocky slopes every spring. They understand that the value of an experience does not lie in the time it begins, but in the depth of presence they give to it. Look at the image of the lotus once more. The lotus does not bloom in the pristine early morning of spring, but often rises amidst the harsh heat of summer. Each petal that opens is a testament to restless vitality. Your soul is the same. It has its own rhythm and its own season for blooming. Do not let numbers or social prejudices define your limits. You can still start a good habit, learn something new, begin a sincere friendship, or simply learn to smile at yourself every morning. So, I want to ask a direct question to your heart. Is there any desire you have buried just because you think you no longer have enough time? Is there any change you have long wished for but postponed because of the fear of age? Believe that as long as you are breathing, you still have the right to start over. This world is still waiting for the unique wisdom and beauty that only you can bring. When we let go of the lie about being too late, we not only rediscover strength, but also open up a space of absolute self-mastery. This leads us to the final part of today's journey, where all these acts of letting go converge to create a new person, one who lives in balance, lightness, and full of light. Let us summarize these lessons together so you can carry that peace into your daily life. We have walked together through a long journey of reflection, where each step was a moment of courage to face the hidden corners of our souls. Looking back at the path we have just traveled, we learned to let go of the narrow belief that there is nothing left to learn, liberated ourselves from toxic relationships, cleared the clutter of material things and memories, and smiled in the face of the natural law of aging. We also returned the right to happiness to ourselves, stopped comparing with the past, showed tolerance for regrets, and finally shattered the lie that everything is too late. These 8 acts of letting go are not losses, but are 8 doors leading you back to your purest and lightest self. Now, Imagine you are standing before a cool green river of wisdom, where you can set down every burden you have carried for so long. Letting go is not a momentary act, but a sacred ritual repeated in every breath each day. When you release your grip, your heart is no longer tightened by the invisible strings of attachment, and that is when you truly begin to live. This is not just the end of a video, but the beginning of a new chapter, full of light and self-mastery in your life. You do not need to try to become someone else. You only need to allow yourself to be who you are, free and serene like a white cloud drifting lazily across the wide, high sky. To mark this moment, I want to invite you to perform an act that serves as a manifesto for your inner self. If you feel your heart is ready to receive this lightness, please leave a single word in the comments: free. When you write this word, see it as an affirmation to the universe and to yourself that you have chosen the path of freedom, choosing to put down what no longer serves your peace. This is not just a line of text, but a healing prayer, a commitment that you will cherish every present moment with a soul that is no longer burdened. May you always maintain clarity in your mind and warmth in your heart. I wish for you to find balance amidst the fluctuations of life and always walk in the light of compassion. Thank you for accompanying me on this healing journey. See you again in the next stories, where we will continue to explore more remedies for the